Imagine you're sitting in this stuffy university laboratory.
Right.
It's the early 1950s. You're seated at a table with like 7 other people, and the researcher at the front of the room holds up 2 white cards.
Okay, setting the scene. I like it.
On the left card, there's a single black line. And on the right card, there are 3 lines of varying lengths. And the researcher asks a question that's so simple, it almost feels kind of insulting.
Like which line matches the other one, right?
Exactly. Which of the 3 lines on the right matches the length of the line on the left? So you look, and the answer is obviously line C. I mean, literally a toddler could tell you it's line C.
Yeah.
But the person to your left calmly states that the answer is line B.
Oh, man.
Then the next person says line B, and the next. By the time it's your turn to speak, your heart is just pounding.
Sweating palms, the whole thing.
Yeah, your palms are sweating, and your entire grip on reality is just fracturing. Do you trust your own eyes, or do you bend to the will of the crowd?
That is the ultimate question.
Welcome to Classic Mosaic Truth. If this episode helps you, please hit like and subscribe for the next one. We are looking at a philosophical landscape today that asks us to just throw away the map entirely.
We really are.
We're doing a deep dive into Ralph Waldo Emerson's classic work, Self-Reliance. And specifically, this is episode 2, and we're focusing entirely on the concept of nonconformity.
And that laboratory scenario you just described, it is the absolute perfect entry point.
You think so?
Oh, definitely. Because it captures that visceral, biological panic of stepping out of line. I mean, most people assume nonconformity is just this philosophical posture, you know?
Right. Like we picture a teenager wearing leather, dyeing their hair hot pink, and just blasting loud music despite their parents.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Emerson's definition, and honestly the reality of what we face every single day, is much quieter and infinitely more terrifying.
It's like navigating a ship by your own internal compass rather than just letting the current of the crowd push you along.
That's a great way to put it. It's that moment in the lab chair where you have to decide if you are going to overwrite your own perception of reality just to avoid making the people around you uncomfortable.
So what's our mission for this deep dive?
Well, first, we're decoding what nonconformity actually means because it gets misunderstood a lot.
Right.
Next, we're going to unpack the psychological forces that make us conform, the really deep wiring. And finally, we'll look at how to actually break free from the crowd in our modern lives.
I love that. And I think we need to draw a hard line right out of the gate here between true nonconformity and what the sources refer to as anti-conformity.
Oh yeah, huge distinction.
Because they look similar on the surface, but mechanically, they are entirely different. Anti-conformity is the teenager dyeing their hair pink.
Right, it's a reactionary reflex.
Exactly. If the crowd says the sky is blue, the anti-conformist says the sky is green, simply because they want to spite the crowd.
Which means, and this is the crazy part, the anti-conformist is still completely controlled by the crowd.
Wait, really? Explain that.
Well, their behavior is entirely dictated by whatever the group is doing, just in reverse. They don't have an internal compass.
Oh, I see.
They're simply operating a negative feedback loop. If your entire identity is built on being the opposite of whatever the mainstream likes, you're basically just a mirror image of a conformist.
You're bound by the exact same algorithm.
Exactly. And Emerson was entirely uninterested in that kind of performative rebellion. For him, true nonconformity was rooted in this concept he called self-trust.
Self-trust over social performance. Our source material defines this as the practice of candor.
Candor, yes.
Basically, refusing to say what you're expected to say merely because it's expected. It means accessing your actual intuition, what Emerson called your aboriginal self.
Aboriginal self, I love that phrase.
It's so good. And speaking from that place, regardless of whether the crowd happens to agree or disagree, because sometimes your authentic truth might actually align with the crowd.
Clear, yeah?
And sometimes it might violently oppose it. But the alignment doesn't matter. The origin of the thought is what matters.
And that origin is exactly what society actively tries to suppress. Emerson uses this incredible metaphor that I think we really need to unpack here.
Oh, the joint stock company.
Yes. He describes society as a joint stock company. So in a normal joint stock company, members agree to pool their resources for mutual benefit, right?
Right. Everybody chips in to get something out.
But in Emerson's societal version of this company, the currency you are asked to pool is your individual liberty and your unique culture. You essentially surrender your sovereignty.
And what are you purchasing with that surrender? Like, what's the payout?
Well, you're buying your daily bread, You're buying safety, predictability, and inclusion.
It's a transaction.
Exactly. Society approaches you with a contract and basically says, look, if you smooth out your rough edges, if you stop asking uncomfortable questions, if you just wear the uniform and nod at the appropriate times, we will make sure you are fed and protected from the cold.
Wow. And it's a transaction that Emerson famously realized results in spiritual death. He wrote that imitation is suicide.
Imitation is suicide. That is so heavy.
It is. When we gloss over that quote, it just sounds like a nice bumper sticker or an Instagram caption.
Right, yeah.
But think about the mechanics of what he is claiming there. When you blindly imitate the beliefs and speech patterns and values of the joint stock company, you are actively assassinating your own authentic identity.
You're killing off the unique entity that is you.
Exactly. You are replacing your unique inner voice with a chorus of external demands. You're walking around, you're drawing breath, but the unique entity that was you has been entirely erased.
And I want to tie that back to the Ash conformity experiments you started with, because those experiments prove that Emerson's joint stock company isn't just some 19th century poetic idea.
No, it's hard science.
It is an observable,
Yeah.
quantifiable psychological phenomenon. When Solomon Asch ran those line-matching trials in the 1950s, the results were absolutely chilling.
We're talking about objective reality being denied.
Exactly. Over 33% of the real participants conformed to the clearly incorrect majority.
Just to fit in.
Just to fit in. And over the course of the various trials, roughly 75% of people caved to the crowd at least once.
That is wild, 75%.
And the control group data makes it even more stark. When people were left alone in a room to match the lines without any group pressure, the error rate was less than 1%.
So it was absolutely not a visual processing error.
No, they knew. People knew they were looking at a shorter line. But the post-experiment interviews revealed the invisible leverage of the joint stock company. Psychologists labeled it normative influence.
Okay, normative influence. That's the fear of standing out, right?
Yes. When Ash debriefed the participants and asked them, like, why did you pick line B when you knew it was line C, they almost universally admitted they knew the group was wrong.
They knew it?
They knew it. But the prospect of being the lone dissenting voice, of risking the ridicule or even just the mild confusion of a room full of complete strangers, it was so overwhelmingly awful that they chose to lie.
They chose to deny reality to maintain group harmony.
Exactly. And we have to look at the evolutionary biology beneath that fear to understand why breaking away from the crowd feels so impossible.
Yeah, because we tend to judge those participants harshly, right?
Yeah.
From the comfort of our homes, we think, oh, I would never do that.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone thinks they'd be the rebel. But our brains are literally wired to experience social exclusion as physical trauma.
Physical trauma, like actual pain.
Yes. Modern neuroscience has shown us that when a person is excluded from a group, even a meaningless group in a laboratory game, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex in the brain lights up.
The dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, what does that do?
That is the exact same neural alarm system that activates when you burn your hand on a stove or break a bone.
Wow. So social pain and physical pain are processed the same way.
Exactly.
That makes total sense from an evolutionary perspective. For early humans roaming the savannah, being cast out of the tribe was a literal death sentence.
You couldn't survive alone.
Right, you couldn't hunt enough calories, defend against predators, or survive the winter. So evolutionary biology essentially engineered our brains to prioritize group cohesion above objective truth.
If agreeing that the sky is green keeps you in the safety of the campfire, your brain tells you to say it is green.
We are fighting millions of years of survival programming when we try to implement Emerson's philosophy.
And we're fighting it every single day, just in different arenas. I mean, we aren't matching lines on cards, and we aren't fighting off saber-toothed tigers.
Right.
But the biological mechanics are exactly the same when we step into the modern workplace. The modern corporation is the ultimate manifestation of Emerson's joint stock company.
Oh, absolutely. And what terrifies me about the modern workplace is how conformity is rebranded as a virtue.
Yes. It gets a PR spin.
Exactly. We do not call it conformity. We call it being a team player. We call it alignment. We talk about culture fit.
But so often when you peel back the layers of corporate synergy, you just find textbook groupthink. It's the prioritization of a smooth meeting over a successful outcome.
Consider the modern equivalent of the Ash experiment. Let's say a major initiative is being proposed by leadership. You're looking at the spreadsheet, and the data is glaringly obvious.
The projections are completely fabricated.
Right. The deadline is impossible. One of our sources uses the specific example of a manager casually assigning a one-day deadline for a project that actually requires a week of rigorous work.
You know this. The person next to you knows this.
But the executive looks around the room and asks for alignment.
And one by one, heads start to nod. People mumble their agreement.
And you sit there doing the calculus in your head. If you speak up and point out the flawed data, you become the friction in the room.
You become the obstacle.
You risk your social standing, your reputation as a collaborator, and potentially your promotion. You risk your daily bread.
So you stay silent. You nod along.
You have just committed the exact type of psychological suicide Emerson warned about, all in the name of being a good team player.
It's so true. We self-censor constantly. We curate our emails before we send them, deleting the sharp, incisive thought and replacing it with corporate jargon just to make it more palatable.
We operate under what Emerson called the eyes of others.
The eyes of others, yes.
We are constantly running a background simulation of how our words and actions will be perceived by the collective, and we adjust our behavior to ensure we never trigger that biological alarm of exclusion.
It is exhausting.
It really is.
And it doesn't stop when we clock out. This insidious habit of micro-accommodation bleeds directly into our personal lives and our deepest relationships.
Think about how much of our social interaction is built on a foundation of artificial harmony.
Oh, for sure.
We agree to go to restaurants we hate, we nod along to political opinions at dinner parties we find totally abhorrent. We even mirror the emotional states of our partners just to avoid a difficult conversation.
Our sources highlight how destructive this is to actual intimacy. We genuinely believe we are keeping the peace, but we're actually building relationships with avatars.
Wait, avatars?
Yeah, like a fake version of yourself. When you constantly suppress your true thoughts to avoid conflict, you are bringing a watered-down, heavily edited version of yourself to the relationship. You are imitating the partner or the friend you think the other person wants.
And Emerson had a brutal assessment of this. He noted that when you operate this way, your every truth is not quite true.
Ouch.
Right. Your agreements mean nothing because your disagreements have been outlawed. How can anyone actually love you if the you they are interacting with is just a curated reflection of their own preferences?
It creates a hollow core in our social lives. We follow social trends, we adopt the internet outrage of the day, we consume the same media, and we completely lose the ability to sit in silence and ask ourselves what we genuinely value.
The Stoic literature we reviewed alongside Emerson captures this modern dilemma perfectly. We live in an ecosystem that actively trains us to distrust our own inner voice.
From a very young age, too.
Exactly. From a young age, we are taught to be polite rather than honest. We are taught to be agreeable rather than self-aware.
And every time we override that internal instinct, every time our intuition screams that something is wrong, but we force a smile and go along with the crowd, we chip away at our internal foundation.
We become absolute experts at pleasing others while becoming complete strangers to ourselves.
Exactly.
But, I hear all of this, and part of me wants to play defense for the conformist for a second.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's look at the brutal reality of the world. Society punishes nonconformity severely. Emerson himself acknowledged this. He said, "The world whips you with its displeasure."
It does.
And we just discussed how social exclusion triggers literal pain in the brain. So looking at it objectively, isn't conforming just a highly rational survival strategy? If sticking my neck out means getting it chopped off, blending into the background seems like the most logical choice a person could make.
I mean, it is incredibly logical in the short term.
In the short term.
That is the trap. Blending in reduces immediate friction. It keeps the emails polite, it keeps the dinner party moving, and it keeps your brain's pain centers dormant.
Right. So why not do it?
Because the bill comes due eventually. The sources emphasize that we have to calculate the long-term cost of constant conformity. On a macro level, in a business or a society, it leads to a total collapse of innovation.
Well, sure. When no one is willing to challenge the prevailing narrative, systems stagnate and eventually fail.
But the personal toll is even worse. It's a phenomenon psychologists call identity diffusion.
Identity diffusion.
Yeah. If you spend decades molding your thoughts to match the contours of whatever room you happen to be standing in, you eventually lose the underlying shape of your own mind.
You become a chameleon stuck in a hall of mirrors.
That's beautifully put. You wake up years down the line and realize you don't know what you enjoy, you don't know what you believe, and you don't know who you are without an audience to reflect back to you.
So the short-term pain of nonconformity, that whip of the world's displeasure, is basically the toll you have to pay to maintain ownership of your own soul.
Exactly. You are choosing between two different types of suffering.
You can choose the sharp, acute, temporary sting of standing out and facing criticism, or you can choose the dull, chronic, lifelong ache of losing yourself.
That framing changes everything, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
But I think this is where people take Emerson's advice, try to apply it, and just drive straight into a ditch.
Oh, absolutely.
Because stepping out of the crowd is tricky, and there are some massive misconceptions about what self-reliance looks like in practice. Let's tear down some of the most common mistakes people make when they try to embrace nonconformity.
The most glaring mistake, and the one that causes the most collateral damage, is confusing independence with sheer arrogance.
Yes.
People read a summary of self-reliance, and they suddenly think they have a license to be an insufferable jerk.
Right. They interpret nonconformity as isolationism, or like
That-
a mandate to stomp all over the opinions and feelings of everyone around them in the name of speaking their truth.
Mark Matusik, one of the authors in our source stack, addresses this beautifully. He points out a quote from Emerson that completely flips the script on the arrogant rebel.
What's the quote?
Emerson believed there is nothing so weak as an egotist.
Nothing so weak as an egotist.
An egotist seems strong because they are loud and demanding, but structurally, they are incredibly fragile.
Because they're completely dependent on the crowd.
That is the irony. An egotist requires an audience to applaud them or fear them or submit to them. Their entire sense of self is constructed on elevating themselves above others.
So if you take away the crowd, the egotist collapses.
Exactly. That is the opposite of self-reliance. True independence is not about dominating the room.
It's about accessing that shared, deeper intuition. Emerson's concept of the Aboriginal self isn't about your petty personal preferences or your desire for power. It's a universal human identity.
Yes.
When you operate from that place, you don't need to demand the corner office or play toxic workplace games to feel secure. You are operating from an internal locus of control.
You're not looking outside for authority, and you're certainly not looking outside for validation.
Which brings us to the second major pitfall. People often conflate nonconformity with raw emotional reaction.
Oh, this happens all the time.
They think being a nonconformist means throwing a tantrum when a social norm inconveniences them. They confuse being difficult with being independent.
But the sources highlight that true nonconformity requires profound intellectual bravery.
Intellectual bravery, not just emotional outbursts.
Right. It requires calm, rational, independent judgment, completely divorced from emotional frenzy.
I love the example of the journalist provided in the Simplicable Guide.
Oh, that's a great example. Walk us through it.
So imagine a reporter covering a deeply polarizing, highly emotional event. The crowd, maybe even their own readership, is demanding a specific, outraged narrative.
Everyone wants them to pick a side and yell about it.
Exactly. An emotional reactor would either join the frenzy or start screaming at the crowd. But the intellectually brave nonconformist simply reports the objective fact, suggesting an unpopular truth in the interest of reality.
They don't yell. They don't attack.
They just stand firmly planted in the truth, even when everyone else is losing their minds.
That kind of composure is the ultimate hallmark of self-reliance. The Stoic materials we analyzed emphasize this heavily too.
How so?
They argue that qualities like self-control, courage, and wisdom are always accessible to us, regardless of the external chaos.
So when you're faced with immense pressure to conform, your initial biological response will probably be fear or anger.
Sure. Because of the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex we talked about.
Right, but self-reliance is the conscious decision to not let those emotions dictate your behavior. You pivot toward rationality. You hold your ground without needing to burn the building down.
Knowing the philosophy is one thing, though. How do we actually cross the bridge from theory to practice?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because going against million-year-old biological wiring is not something you just decide to do one morning over coffee. You have to train for it. You have to build the capacity to tolerate social friction.
It operates exactly like a physical training regimen. If you put a massive weight on the bar on day one, you will crush yourself.
Exactly.
If you try to dismantle your entire social conformity structure in one afternoon, you will panic and retreat. You have to start with micro-exposures. You have to build progressive resistance.
So let's do that right now.
Let's do it.
We are going to walk through a practical mental framework we are calling the nonconformity reset.
And for you listening, you don't need a pen and paper for this. You don't need to pause what you're doing. Just walk through these steps in your mind as we lay them out. The goal here is to locate your authentic voice beneath the layers of social sediment.
So first step in the reset is basic awareness. I want you to identify one specific recent situation where you defaulted to the crowd.
Just scan your memory over the past week or two. Find a moment where you felt that slight internal tug of disagreement, but you chose to smooth it over.
Maybe it was a minor accommodation. A coworker suggested a new software tool in a meeting, and even though you knew it was inefficient, you nodded along because everyone else seemed excited.
Or maybe it was a conversation with a family member where they made a casual remark that violated your values. And instead of pushing back gently, you just changed the subject or hummed in agreement.
Find that specific moment. Try to remember the physical sensation of suppressing your own thought.
It usually feels like a slight tightening in the chest or a dropping sensation in the stomach.
Right. Now hold that memory and move to step 2. In that specific moment, if we could magically remove all the social consequences, if your boss couldn't fire you, if your family member couldn't judge you, if the fear of awkwardness vanished, what did you actually believe?
What was the unedited thought before the joint stock company got its hands on it?
That isolated, unedited thought is your aboriginal self. It's the flash of pure perception before the safety algorithms kick in.
You have to acknowledge it. You have to look at that thought and say,
Yeah.
that was my truth and I buried it.
And you aren't judging yourself for burying it.
No, not at all. You were simply locating the compass you ignored.
And that leads to the final, most critical step of the reset.
Mm.
You have to take one small, independent action based on that internal compass.
You have to bridge the gap between knowing your truth and manifesting it in the physical world.
But keep the stakes incredibly low. Do not go into the office tomorrow and launch a manifesto against the management team.
No, please don't do that.
Find a tiny rep. If we use the meeting example, maybe your action is sending a very brief, calm, follow-up email.
Something like, after reviewing the notes from our discussion, I have a few lingering concerns about the implementation timeline based on our current workload. Happy to chat about it later.
Perfect. You're not declaring war. You're simply placing your authentic thought on the record.
It can be even smaller than that. It can be entirely personal. Maybe tomorrow you intentionally decline an invitation to an arbitrary social gathering that you've been attending for years out of sheer obligation.
And you don't offer an elaborate fake excuse.
Yeah.
You just politely decline.
Or maybe you finally admit to a friend that you actually despise the television show you've been pretending to enjoy together.
The scale of the action doesn't matter. The mechanics of the action do.
Because every time you take a tiny step based on your own internal compass, you are teaching your brain that the world doesn't end when you break consensus.
The whip of the world's displeasure might sting for a second, but you realize you can survive it.
And more importantly, you survive it with your integrity intact.
That realization is profoundly liberating, and it allows us to synthesize everything we've covered today into a few actionable truths.
Let's recap them.
First, independence is a verb. It is not a state of being. You don't suddenly achieve self-reliance and stay there forever.
It's an active daily practice of making choices that align with your inner reality rather than the external pressures.
Next, as you engage in that practice, the clarity of your intuition grows. When you spend your life suppressing your inner voice, it becomes a whisper. You can barely hear it over the noise of the crowd.
But every time you listen to it and act on it, the signal gets stronger. It becomes your default operating system.
And finally, we have to dismantle the myth of confidence. People often paralyze themselves because they think they need to feel completely confident and fearless before they can take an independent stand.
The reality is the exact opposite. Confidence is the byproduct of the action. You step out into the discomfort, you survive the friction, and the confidence arrives after the fact.
The action builds the armor.
I want to leave you with one final thought that completely recontextualizes this entire journey. We spend so much energy worrying that our nonconformity is a selfish act.
We do. We worry that if we stop imitating the crowd, we'll isolate ourselves and damage our communities.
But what if your willingness to stand apart is actually the most profound service you can render to the people around you?
That requires us to look back at the Ash experiments one last time, looking past the initial depressing statistics.
Yes, the baseline conformity was terrifying. But Ash ran variations on the experiment, and he discovered something incredibly beautiful about human nature.
He ran a trial where he introduced just one dissenting voice.
Right. Among all the actors giving the wrong answer, Ash instructed just one actor to give the correct answer before the real participant had to speak.
And the introduction of that single truth teller completely shattered the power of the group.
It's amazing.
When the real participant heard just one other person state objective reality, their conformity rate plummeted. It dropped from roughly 33% down to a mere fraction. The spell was broken.
Think about the magnitude of that. That one dissenting actor didn't argue with the crowd. They didn't try to persuade anyone. They simply stated the truth out loud.
And by doing so, they gave the real participant permission to trust their own eyes again.
Your quiet act of independence might be the exact beacon someone else needs. When you refuse to laugh at the mean-spirited joke, when you calmly state the unpopular truth in a meeting, you are not just freeing yourself.
You might be the single dissenting voice that gives the person sitting next to you the courage to drop their blindfold.
You are holding the door open for reality. It is a massive responsibility, but it is also an incredible opportunity to elevate the culture around you, rather than just submitting to it.
That is the ultimate promise of Emerson's philosophy. You save yourself, and in doing so, you might just save the room.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today, and we have only just begun to chart this territory. Join us next time for Episode 3, Individual Judgment, Thinking Clearly Without Outside Influence. Thanks for being here. If you want the full series, check the playlist and please like and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.